You're tuned into RX Radio. Movement prescribed. Brought to you by Prescript.com. A personalized approach to keeping you healthy and making your best even better. Your hosts, Dr. Jordan Shallow and Dr. Jordan Ginta.
All right, guys, welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio. Real special one for you guys. This is really kind of an introduction to someone who's been with us since the jump and is now coming on as part of this teaching staff at Prescript. Really couldn't be more excited to have James with us. So this episode is with Killian Hamilton and James Thayer. James Thayer is a coach out of Washburn University. So James has been around since the jump. One of the most well-read, level-headed, forward-thinking coaches I've ever come across. Lucky enough now to have James be joining Prescript with James McIntosh, with Killian Hamilton, Jordan Junta, myself, Stuart Locke. So really excited. He's the voice of reason. So James is going to be helping us teaching Prescript labs moving into the new year with some really exciting stuff we have coming with RX Plus programming, which we'll talk about that. So we're going to be opening up the Prescript labs to the general public, and James is going to be helping teach these labs, so interactive lab sessions that are meant to complement the Prescript Level 1, Prescript Barbell, Prescript Weightlifting, and incoming Prescript Skill Acquisition. Guys, if you haven't signed up yet, registration is live on the website. Level 1 won't be up for the next semester until early in the new year, but right now Skill Acquisition and the Barbell course, as well as the Olympic Weightlifting or Prescript Weightlifting, is up and live. So this is really good insight into James Thayer as a person, as a coach. We've been lucky to know James for a handful of years now, and his skill set is unmatched. And the nice thing is he helps level us out. You kind of hear in this episode, he's the voice of reason. Killian goes full Rain Man and just starts screaming, and James brings it back to planet Earth and makes it something palatable, which is great for as far as the episode goes, coaching, communication and coaching, because at the end of the day, I think that's where a lot of coaches fall short, is in the communication aspect of coaching and not being able to relay the intent of what it is they're trying to get their client to do, especially in the online space, which is something that James really excels in my opinion, and just listening to, again, the level-headedness coming through, balancing out the psychosis of myself and Mr. Hamilton. So this is James Thayer, coaching communication Prescript lab instructor moving into the new year. Very excited to have James with us, guys. As mentioned previously, if you guys are looking to sign up for some of the courses, registration is still open for Prescript Barbell, as well as Prescript Weightlifting and Skill Acquisition Level 1 coming up in the new year. So guys, do check out James on Instagram, Thayer2513, or search James Thayer on Instagram. Shoot him a message whenever I have coaching questions or programming questions. He's definitely someone I consult with on a regular basis. So very excited again to have him on board. So do head over to Instagram, Thayer2513. Give him a shout, give him a follow. Just always puts up really interesting stuff in the trenches, training every day. And really excited to have him on board. So James, thanks again, man, so much for your time. Very excited to have you working with us, and looking forward to more episodes in the future. Guys, if you like the episode, do let us know. Do the whole screenshot share thing on Instagram. We'll always appreciate it. But without any further ado, guys, we'll see you next week. Do enjoy the Christmas holidays if that's your jam. If not, hopefully enjoy some time off, and we'll see you next week. Guys, James Thayer, do enjoy the episode.
So, gentlemen, long time in the works, man. James, nice to finally put a face to an Instagram handle.
Yeah, good to. We've actually talked before. So whenever you did the 3 or 4 hour presentation at Destination Dallas.
Plano, I do recall.
Because that's whenever
Jarrett's Hall.
I'm terrible with names.
Yeah, well, apparently so am I. Yeah, dude, that was great. That's a sick gym. Have you been to their new one yet? Oh man, they just opened a new one. I think just outside of Plano. Those guys, it's so weird. Like Gasp, the clothing company, there's like this 10 Swedish people that live in Texas. And if you flew from Texas from another country and you just met these people, you're like, man, that Texas accent is not really what I expected.
Well, that's like, have you been down around Austin? So on your way between Waco and Austin, there's this little like Czech convenience store right off the side of the highway. And strangest, like if you're familiar with Buc-ee's in Texas, it's just as strange. They have like a deli, a bakery, everything in there. But their logo is two pigs necking. And in the deli, they have that mounted above everything. So you're just like, why is this in Texas?
Yeah, two cultures that love automatic rifles, Czech and Texans. I imagine it's like, you remember the original, I think it was the original Men in Black, where they goes into the pawn shop and he's like, show him the goods, Jeeves, and the guy that they shoot his head off and it grows back. And he's like, no, like I'm just selling like stolen Rolexes, like show him the goods. And they hit the counter. I feel like pigs necking turn into like AR-15s where the counters flip over.
Just the whole back wall just spins.
Yeah. Well, dude, thanks for taking the time on this. Like you are probably, I would argue that you're one of the most well-read or well-listened people in the fitness industry, judging by the amount of listen. Well, like, dude, you're like every day I like look at your story and it's like podcast of the day. And like, you're burning through more content than I think anyone I've ever come across.
Yeah. I mean, because I can multitask so much easier going through and listening to the podcasts. Like I really enjoy reading books, but you have to dedicate so much time and focus to it that like now just podcasts, having those conversations, I get to join in my head during them and be like, oh, this is how I'd answer it. So yeah, it just gives me that opportunity to kind of burn through it and like just expand what I'm learning and what some things that I'd never seek out.
How much do you do outside the fitness space? Like, and this is something me and Killian were talking earlier about, like, you know, when we have you on, what's kind of like a pertinent subject matter. And I think one thing that like, obviously I know Killian does well, and something that in following you that you do really well is like, you have a base level of knowledge that licenses you creativity, right? Like Charles Glass can kind of do whatever the fuck he wants in the gym because he's done everything in the gym. He's like, look, I've been wearing the same blue sweater and black hat over my dreadlocks for 30 years. I'm doing a lat pull down on a bicep curl machine. How? We're going to figure it out. But it's like he's licensed that ability to be creative because he's just fucking done everything. I feel like you two especially are kind of at that point where it's just like, I saw you yesterday doing the Pavlov press with the reverse hyper.
Reverse hyper? Yeah.
And I was like, holy MacGyver. And I thought that was actually what triggered it. It's like, all right, creativity I think is going to be like a cornerstone of what I want to talk to you about today. Cause that's when I watch you and like, I watch the story going like, okay, this guy is digesting more information than anyone I've ever seen in the industry. But the information and like application are two totally different things. But every day you're in that fucking, it used to be a convent, a church. What is that gym that you train in?
So it's a strength guild here in Topeka. And so I think it was like 1804 whenever it was created. It used to be a mill. Then it was an auction house. And then Phil, the gym owner, took it over. So half, like the quarter that is in my video, like is the actual gym. And then in the back and above, they do shipping, fulfillment, and printing for different fitness companies. And so that's the rest. So that's the rest of the business is all through there. And the gym's just like this, just stacked right in this little old mill.
It looks like it's where the Manson family lives. I'm not going to lie. It's terrifying.
Yeah. And I mean, got the soybeans and cornfield right across the street, got some mess somewhere in the neighborhood. It's good times.
That's peak level Kansas. I think that's on the Kansas flag.
just meth hidden next to the bison.
Yeah, just a burnt up water bottle and like a corn husk. Dakota Arms.
But I guess like what was like, when did you first started getting into like, I guess kind of the fitness space? Because I think a lot of people aspire, I think, to be on your level, which is like the weird part about social media is like, it's all traded in social capital. But like, I look at you and be like, this guy is the guy. Like, he's more switched on than anyone that I know when it comes to like, just again, the volume of information. Like, when did that start and where did it start? Like, what were the OG, like, okay, I'm getting into fitness. This is where I'm sourcing my information from.
I mean, it's kind of just been developed over time. Like, I've probably been in a weight room since I was 12, like 11 or 12, because we had a junior high program in high school. And so that was kind of the introduction to it, not really like ton of education outside of it, but this is actually something I want to talk to you two about as well, is like how your introduction into fitness or the weight room sets the trajectory of your focus down the road. So with mine, weights were never the focus. It was always the application of it towards sports. And so like it was always just, I do this to get better at this. Weights never really had an interest to me or a big focus, because it was always that, hey, doing good in this creates a better performance in these different sports. It was probably only until I stopped being an athlete that it became a greater focus. So yeah, I was in school, was a double undergrad, poli-sci, and then human health performance. Yeah, I know you appreciate that. Yeah. But yeah, so going through poli-sci, pre-law, getting towards my final semester, and I'm like, I don't want to do anything with law because half of my family is law enforcement, so I can't be anything in defense. A prosecutor doesn't really get paid what they're worth, or the time and energy they put in, and everything else was paper law. So about that time, started working in campus rec, and that's my profession now, is campus rec at a university. And started out as a head lifeguard, became the lifeguard supervisor, worked in facilities, switched over to group fitness and personal training. So I was like, hey, might as well branch this and get a degree on it. And from that, it just kind of built up. And really, I think that's where the focus originated, was just exposure to fitness and the different entities you can take it. And then through campus rec, got exposure to more people and variations of it, and just kind of ran with it. I had a lot of opportunities that got introduced to some people at ACIT fitness conferences, and I was like, oh, I like that. That makes sense. So dove deeper in that. Went to on it whenever I was in Texas. So I was like, oh, I might as well learn about some kettlebells and like these maces, and it just kept building on of, okay, corrective exercise, basically just a pathway of me finding things that interest me and diving deep into a rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think the circuitous route always seems to be the common trail of people that I like are worth talking to. Like people that like, I saw an Instagram account of a guy lifting and I wanted to lift. Like the classic bodybuilder story, right? I don't know if we've interviewed a single and nothing against bodybuilders. Like some of my closest friends are pro bodybuilders, but like, the age old story of I picked up a Flex magazine when I was 15 and I've been eating fucking 2.5 pounds of chicken a meal for 15 years is not a compelling story to me. Like that's like, I appreciate training with them, but at the same time, like, I don't want to say talking with them is like not really a fruitful endeavor, but I always find like, some of Killian's best analogies come from his work in carpentry. Like the fact that the tattoo, the measure twice, cut once, that's like, and he tells a story about like, and he can take it very much into that world. So I find that most people that get into fitness indirectly, like they're like my girlfriend walking through a grocery store. She's looking one way and she's leaving a trail of bodies in her wake. It's like, oh, she just stumbles into people as people kind of stumble into the fitness industry. Who is the first, like, what was the first podcast? What was the first article or website that like you remember going, okay, like I'm clearly in this now. Whatever this is something that I'm clearly interested in.
That's a good question. What kind of set the I mean, it might be something different, but off the top of my head, honestly, might have been like some of Jim Windler stuff, just because how simple it is, and he's very unapologetic for anything he puts out, and I kind of appreciate that.
Okay, him.
Do you want me to comment on Jim Wendler, or do you want me to say it?
Not really, because I would fear for your life if it was anything but positive.
Yeah, no, but no, I think even just to touch on it without him coming to beat me up is like anyone who's unapologetic, right or wrong, like I love it. I don't care how interesting your ideas are. Like that's why I love Louis Simmons. I don't think Louis Simmons is right 99% of the time, but you also can't argue with him. So I'll read all his books. But to be honest with you, like I comment on Westside a lot. Like when I got seriously into training, Westside was the first thing like I read, because Louis Simmons put all his articles on the internet for free back in the day. So like I didn't have to buy the book. Like I found it the other day. Like I have a binder where I printed every single Westside article and put it in a binder. And I would just keep it in my gym bag and go to the gym and like do whatever. But the first book I ever bought, because podcasts weren't really big when I started, was Warrior Cardio by, what's his fucking name? Brian Rooney. He's like a UFC dude. So, dude, he's actually a pretty cool guy. So he stole a bunch of Westside stuff to train these UFC guys. But he trained, like, I think the Diaz brothers for a bit. He trains this guy, Jim Miller. And Jim Miller looks exactly like me if you Google him.
I'm looking this guy up. We're getting him on the podcast.
Yeah, so there's this UFC fighter, Jim Miller. I was in a bar once, and a guy thought I was Jim Miller. So I looked him up, and then I looked up the guy that trained Jim Miller. I'm like, well, fuck it. This is probably going to work for me. And we're both like, at the time, we were both 155. Guy looks like me. So, yeah. So I think like Warrior Cardio was the first book I bought, and it was just really hard. But when you read that book, interestingly enough, like as possibly poorly executed as it is, it very much follows some of the stuff that we talk about, like mobility, stability, or like cognitive to associative to autonomous, in the way he trains UFC guys. So I was like, well, this is something that I watch on TV and it makes sense. And when kind of like what James said, when I looked at the way he trained these athletes, I was like, well, this is like directly applicable, even if it's over specified. So that was probably the first thing I got into was Wayne Rooney, sorry, I think it is. Fuck, I
was going to say, I just searched Brian Rooney, and I think I'm now on a subscriber list for some real estate agent in Cincinnati or something.
Let me quote the guy's name properly before I fuck this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like the unapologetic thing. The more I'm like that we're fucking head in the sand in this thing, the more I come to respect it. Like I almost, and me and Killian probably on a daily basis, I would say we send each other just posts that other people put up, and like I want to, like from Mussolini from the balcony, I just want to mow these people down on the internet. But it's like I don't know why, but I can't do that. Like I used to kind of be a little bit more vocal about and maybe it's like a business strategy thing, but like someone I've come to admire lately, and I've been a little bit vocal in small social circles of my friends and also large platforms on the internet, is like the way Lane Norton just pillories people. Like I kind of respect it a little bit, because it's like there's some people that I would love to just like put their head on a spear and just put it at the end of my Instagram page and walk away and be like, all right, this is what happens if you guys do any stupid shit. And it's like there's something to be said about right or wrong, just like the hero that nobody asked for, like just coming in and just fucking roasting people. Because like it is, I mean, at the end of the day, like especially we can see the positive impact, especially like with your position in rec. Like one of my closest friends does your position. He's the director of athletic physical education and recreation. Running rec programs, running like a PT section within the university, managing intramural sports, the gym floor staff and things like that. And it's like, you can really see the positive impact of it. But on the flip side, especially on the internet and like faceless information kind of being relayed without any consequence, people don't see or are privy to like the negative consequences of bad information, right? Like Wendler, we can have a crack and say it's simple and, he's scary and he might come beat Killian's ass. But like, I know plenty of people that come really strong on 5-3-1.
Yeah.
Right. And like you talked about Rooney, like, this cardio program, the more you get into it, like you can kind of see like the ebbs and flows. Like, all right, like I can understand like a framework behind it. But some people are just like, yeah, fuck it, say it. Like, just like go out there and just disseminate whatever the hell they want.
Well, I think like, I don't know if you guys follow Vernon Griffith. He's like, dude, he's like James, but like on steroids in terms of like, I've never seen a guy lean more into a landmine on one leg until I saw this guy. Like, I thought James was like the one-legged, like, baby cradle landmine god, and then I added Vernon Griffith. I'm like, this guy goes for it. But he made a post the other day where he's like, the idea that when you see a video of someone's training, especially an athlete, like, this is a snapshot into a greater picture. Like, there's so much more nuance. It's like, no, like, if you go to Vernon Griffith's IG, it's like all he does is like one-legged, weird center of mass landmine stuff. But that's not all he does. Like, that's why you click on his IG page. So like you're saying, it's understanding that there is nuance, right? Like, to many things, and to just go out into the internet and throw weird baby cradle landmine stuff out there and be like, well, this is it. This is all you got to do, and disappear. Like, that's doing a disservice to the people that have the attention span they have nowadays for accepting information. Like, not everybody's James. I'm not James. Like, this guy can listen to podcasts every day. I can't do it. So for me, when I log into Instagram, like, I got about 13 seconds of attention span. If I go to someone's page and they're telling me to, you know, lay on a Bosu ball and do Swiss bar chain bench press, that's all the attention I have. And like, now my entire program is Bosu ball, Swiss bar chain bench press, and I'm fucked.
I guess, I mean, this is kind of like to dovetail off that. I don't know. I promote cynicism probably more than most, as like, I'm probably more cynical than most. Like, because a lot of people can talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect, and the more you know, the more you don't know. But I feel like one thing that's, and James, I want to get your opinion on this, because I feel like you have such a breadth in so many more, because like your unbiased approach and wanting to learn, where I'm kind of sitting there like an old man and going like, get the fuck off my lawn, asshole. And it's like, at what point do people draw the line? Right? Like, because I think, oh, you know, everything works. All roads lead to Rome. It's like, no, they don't. There are definitely roads that lead to Naples and don't go to Rome, right? Like, even in context, there's some things that I think people can hide behind this smoke bomb veil of like, oh, well, you know, context and nuance. And like, for a long time that would work because no one was giving context or nuance. So by saying that depends, context, nuance, they were able to shield themselves kind of from any sort of ridicule without giving up the whole plot. But like, I really think there's a place to draw the line in sand with what we know, logic and reason, to be like, okay, that exercise, I don't give a fuck. Unless you're preparing for the Swiss ball bench press chain Olympics, there's no reason that exercise should be in there. How is it that like you digest so much information, and like what is your filtration process of like, you know, we got like the Drake meme going on and be like, no, like the Swiss ball chain bench press Bosu ball, and like, oh, like, you know, here's like a bridge floor press. Like, yeah, this one works. What's like, how do you start to critique and filter what it is you deem, I don't want to say worthy of applying, but like, I think a lot of people struggle with digging their heels in, and not on an ethos from like a theoretical level, not based in any sort of like applied science, but like most people are just so open book, and it makes them really smart, but then it cripples them when it comes to actually applying methods. Like, what's your filtration process?
I mean, I think it has to start somewhere in where your foundation is. So like if we're just going off of the Swiss ball stuff, because that's a easy target to hit. But so going off that, like applying it of how I understand stability, what is the application for that? If I can envision some type of application that I'm already doing that is not a far stretch to get to that, I think that'd be kind of the starting point. Or is it just something brand new that in no other, like it's so specified that in no other way can I apply this to something, but also if there's no kind of, to use Killian's the runways of progression, like if there's no way to regress or progress from whatever this exercise is, how can you use it? Because there's no build-up point. Last time me and Killian talked, like kind of in the same lines of his runways of progression, I have what was it? It's one second. It's a spiderweb spectrum to progress. And so with that, thinking about whenever a spider builds out a web, it has to set the posts, makes the lines, and goes down to the center. So the center is the strongest point of it, but it can only get to that center, and it can only be strong in that center point with those bridges building down to it. So it's defining and figuring out what those bridges or what that webbing is that can build down to that center core. So finding whatever your center core is, if you want to apply it to your knowledge or your center core of your exercises, how does whatever you're trying to expand out to, how does that relate back to this? And if you want to go on an easier point, kind of what are your staples on that? So if we want to look at like I work with Ace Fitness, so some of my terminology is from them, but if we want to break it down into 5 primary movements: single leg, double leg, or bend and lift, push, pull, and a rotation. So within those, how does it fit within the confines of that? And from that, branching it down, is there a way to progress that or regress that towards the bigger goal, or how it fits into this bigger program or bigger block?
Do you think a lot of people's issue is just not having like the clarity of the objective outcome? Like, because what you described, like whether it's runway or progression, whether it's, spider web, whether it's dynamic correspondence, everything that all 3 of those models have is an end point of the runway or a center point of the web, or, like a competition that we're preparing for. Like, I think a lot of like, how is it that you guess maybe set goals in your training to then start to filter? Because like the variable is going to be the center of the web, right? Like what it is that we're actually trying to do. How does that change? And like in your own programming, what is the center of that web?
I mean, with right now, because kind of how my programming works, there's a strength focus to it, and then outside, kind of like more open days to try out some of this stuff. So sometimes that's what you're seeing is me trying it out. If I like it, if it works, if I see some value in it, it might be from some of those days. So with the main blocks of it, it's mainly strength training, and then seeing how that can benefit the 4 primary lifts of a bench, a squat, deadlift, overhead press. Whether it's benefiting it directly or benefiting it through picking up some of the things that those movements lack because they're so stationary in their positioning. So like something like the Pell-off press with the reverse hyper, looking at if that's trunk training through a split stance, how that can benefit and how that can relate back to maintaining that rigidity, not just in an upright position, but now I'm going through and I can look at through this more dynamic of that split stance, or in that lunge where I'm less stable, that has carryover to more stable positions.
Yeah, I think the hard part is once we start like going from the gym as an objective outcome to the field as an objective outcome, really starts to muddy the waters of explanations of that center of the web, right? Like, because you can like, I really like that Pell-off press. I'm not huge on the Pell-off press until I saw that pendulum arm of perturbation. I was like, oh, this is much more specific to how someone might react in a split lunge. Like, I don't know, like I work with a handful of football players, and I don't know many of them that are in the middle of the game. Like, wait, I caught the ball here. I'm going to bring it in, and then I'm going to fake out here. I'm going to bring it back in. It's like, okay, that's probably not going to be transferable. But you can, like, I find in the strength and conditioning world, like the nebulous cloud gets thicker because like the justifications can be more vague because of the varied circumstance of the actual objective outcome. It's like people can make up these plays in their head where it's like, oh, if you're in this position, I guess what point, like extrapolating out from the gym is like, and Killian, like kind of pushing this to you, is hyperspecificity the job of the sport and not necessarily the job of training? Like sometimes training can just be, look, they're like, I got a kicker I work with that is sending me like speed block pulls, like 500 pounds. He's a kicker. It's like him deadlifting, the only task that's really achieving, and like, you know, talking about negating eccentric load and all that shit. And again, this allows me as a strength coach to give a nebulous answer. My real answer why he's doing block pulls right now is because it's time that he's not kicking. Period. That's it. So like from a sport specificity standpoint, how do you draw the line in the sand between like, all right, this is so specific that it's just the sport, just go play the sport, or like this is actually going to be, like Killian, to use your words, like more associative to better help with the autonomous execution of the skill of the sport.
Yeah, so I'm working a lot with baseball now. Like I would say like 70% of my week is with baseball, and it's exciting because especially with pitchers, like which I work with specifically, pitching, like that's a really strange shape. Like when you see a guy throw a pitch in slow motion, how many different movements, like when I watched it for the first time, like one of my guys like throw in slow motion on the mound, I was like, man, how many different movements is he really doing? Like if I dumb this down to what I know, how many different exercises can I see in the shape of this? So how much specificity is the job of the sport? How much specificity is the job of the weight room? I think the specificity mainly lies in most sports in the sport itself. And it's how can I find positions that bridge strength to stability. Like how can I find a bridge point between like ultimate strength and a stable sagittal plane to the shape of the sport to transfer anything they do in the weight room, which is I think where things get lost in sport is we see guys go to the weight room and they either do something hyper specific that actually has a low level of transfer, or they do something like so sagittal and strength oriented that it also has a low level of transfer. So that's where, like, when I started getting into trying to be smarter about training and I started watching like Mike Boyle train guys or Schless, and it was like, it's not yet hyper specific, but they're understanding like that balance point in strength and stability. So like when I work with throwing athletes, it's like, I'm not having some guy on one leg, like pendulum back and forth while like cleaning a kettlebell and holding a band. Like that's insane. But like,
who does that? So what's the name of the account? Sorry to cut you off, because I feel like I get asked this all the time. There's a dude out there that's like a YouTube channel that's like wait, what's that?
Joel Seedman.
No, it's fuck. Let me find. Oh, functional patterns. Is that it?
Yep. That's the
I
other.
love how James laughed. James laughed. That means that's bad. If James is laughing, that's real bad.
It's terrible.
A little bit of dance to that too.
But and like at the end of the day, like is that providing an inoculated stimulus for an athlete that's allowing them to just not be training, right? Like how much, especially I think depends on the variance of like how much skill, because with a pitcher, right, fucking skill is everything. Yeah. Hence, income skill acquisition guy. Go.
That's the pendulum in sport that you have to understand, right? And I think there's too many guys who, when they hear sport specificity, for some reason it means like football, or like I don't know what the fuck the other thing they're doing is, but it's like sports specificity. Oh, it's football training. It's power cleans and vertical jumps, and it's like, it's funny that sports specificity, as specific as a term that is actually the most generally used term in strength and conditioning. I'm a sport-specific coach, yet they do the most general adaptation to sport. So I think like all sports lie once again on this integer scale of strength and skill, to where there's a sport you can just advance the strength and the skill doesn't matter. And it's like there's dudes who play football and there's dudes who play rugby, low-level skill adaptation, high-level strength adaptation, you'd never know. It doesn't matter. But you got guys like quarterbacks, kickers, pitchers, these guys, sprinters, like high-level skill, low-level strength adaptation. Dudes get real fast and don't need a high level of strength adaptation. They need a high level of skill adaptation. So when I look at especially like working with high-level skill guys, I look at this idea of like cluster setting or compound setting, very specific sport work or skill work with whatever they want them to do in the weight room. It's like, I'm not going to try and find a weird version of a lift that's now not efficient for strength to make it more skilled. I'll just give them like a B stance trap bar deadlift or a trap bar jump, and then I'll have them superset that with a very sport specific drill that they do. Like my pitcher will do like some upper body stability work or lower body strength stuff, and then he just supersets it with something that he's good at. some self tosses, you know what I mean? Or some like reverse bounds to throws. It's like, he knows how to do that stuff. That's specific to sport. I don't need to give him a 7-pound like baseball tied to a resistance band and have him do windmills. It's like, no, dude, like do your throwing drill, superset it with like this half kneeling medicine ball slam. And like, you'll start to see that transference, right? Just within the short time between adaptation.
Like, I love the thought of like, you said it in like looking at the pitch and like, you know, if you've ever seen Major League pitch and the slow-mo of like, and use the word shapes, because like from an architecture standpoint, that's how things get built. So the architecture of a program is really built on shapes. Like you look at old cathedrals and Gothic cathedrals, like you're looking at pointed spires, arches, circles, triangles, and squares. Like that's really like, look at the Chartres Cathedral, how they built it. Chartres is a cathedral in France, and it's literally just all like Gothic era architecture. It's just a confluence of shapes. Right? So when architecting a program and putting together, and you're on your T-square and you're putting this program together, understanding like the shapes of the movement and like how the shapes are dynamic too, right? Like how one has to play into the other, or like, you know, how associative would lend to autonomous. Like for example, and I love the integer scale of strength to skill. Like you make an O lineman stronger, you've made that O lineman more skillful. Now there's obviously a mental aspect to reading plays and knowing the game. It's going to allow that O lineman to execute he's going to be able to kind of hone in that strength. But Christian McCaffrey, when I was at Stanford, couldn't bench 225 more than 10 times. I think he got 8 times on his pro day. This kid, I mean, he's yeah, right. You laugh, but like, you know, who's sitting here with lesser degrees of clothing on talking on a podcast, and who's like making fucking fat stacks. So he kind of gets the last laugh, but how much of his job is really skill and how much of it is strength, right? Whereas like, you know, that O lineman, if, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like who would be like an OG, like O lineman or D line. That's just like, they're so strong. Like, what's his name? Harrison, that's pushing those like 1,000-pound sleds and proves that he may or may not have a lumbar spine made of like adamantium. But it's like, that's, dude, one more plate on that sled means one more fearful guy on the other side of that line, right? So like the correlation of that, and people try and prove the HyperSpecificity model, and without even looking at the integer scale, as you said, of skill to strength, because the HyperSpecificity is plotting movements that are beneficial on that integer scale, right? Like, you know, I'll use like, for example, a running back versus a kicker. Like I'll use single leg bounding as some sort of like dynamic, like almost like a French contrast method. Heavy load, maybe it's trap bar, clean pull, something like that, into single leg bounding. The kicker got to stop dead. Why? Because he's got to plant that left foot before he fires off the right boot. A running back is go, get off the ground. Because when a running back is running, it's go, get off the ground. And when a kicker is kicking, it's stop dead and swing the damn leg, right? So it's like, just like, okay, where on the integer scale is strength to skill is where I'm going to prioritize in training what like the real objective outcomes. Like, oh, just get stronger. If you're like, someone's like, oh, someone sent me a message the other day. Like I coach, I think it was actually baseball players. I coach like a college level baseball players, and we have this kid. He's really promising, but I just want to get him bigger. I was like, what? Why? Like, why do you want to do that? I want him to put some strength on. I was like, what does he throw? Like low 90s. And back squatting is going to do what for that? Like fill in that blank, right? Because he's looking at skill, like he's looking at strength, where complementing in skill on that integer scale would be something that actually promotes the objective outcome or the improvement of the objective outcome.
Yeah, and that's a big like discussion I have with like a lot of the pitchers that I work with, right? Like I have a guy, he sent me like the equipment list that he had because of COVID. Like he couldn't get in the gym, and he had like a bunch of kettlebells, some bands or whatever. He's like, yeah, you know, I know I don't have a barbell, like I don't have a lot of weight. And I'm like, when were we going to use either of those two things, man? Like you spend 90% of the game on one of two legs holding a 5-ounce baseball. I don't know what safety bar squatting 500 pounds is going to do. And it's like, when I look at pitching, like you said, like understanding like the shapes and positions of sport, like I look at this idea of like, this guy wheels up to throw 95 and like he's standing on one leg, hip flexion, knee flexion. And it's like, all of a sudden he decides to, number one, change his center of mass and also change like the rotational position of the body. So it's like, man, like why would I safety squat bar this guy in the sagittal plane when I could load like a really heavy kettlebell on one shoulder and have him go from like sprinter pose to lateral lunge. And it's like, we can build up on that. You know what I mean? Like he can go straight into like step up, like ipsilaterally loaded step up. Then he can go sprinter pose to lateral lunge, then sprinter pose to lateral lunge to rotation to like a forward facing lunge. And it's like, now he gets on the mound with a 5-ounce baseball. And when he stands on one leg, he doesn't get the yips anymore because he stood on one leg with 100 pounds. So it's like, that wasn't a strength adaptation. That was a stress adaptation. It's like, I'm asking you to move through multiple planes, slowly adapting you to stress, not slowly adapting you to strength. And the other thing to be said too, when we look at like hyperspecificity or getting bigger and stronger, is the idea of, when does just being an athlete overtake any of the bullshit that we're talking about? Like, I coach a guy who went to a pro day 2 days before pro day, threw 95. Pro day throws 84 because he gets the yips. Dude, are you crazy? So like, and he videotapes every single throw, every single pitch, and he'll sit on his couch for 2 hours and watch every single video. So his entire program last week was, don't bring your camera to the mound, go be an athlete. And I had this guy use his offhand. So he's right-handed. I had him use his left hand, self-toss to his left hand, and throw balls for the last 15 minutes of every workout. He came back this week, turned the camera on, huge improvement. And it was like, at the end of the day, maybe it's about going to be an athlete, right? So it's like we're talking about, like, where does hyperspecificity fall off? And like, where on the other side does like almost like just general adaptation to being a stud take over? Like, sometimes that's what it is.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between adaptation and inoculation.
Yeah,
I think that's a concept that doesn't nearly get talked about enough in strength and conditioning fields, especially. Like, the idea that, look, we're just trying to inoculate a stimulus, and getting people just almost out of their own head, where it's like, you know, going into a camp, like if you're 4 weeks out from a camp, I mean, NFL is probably going into camp in it's the 10th right now. They'll be in there around the 28th. So it's like, you're not going to get anyone bigger. You're faster, but you can fix the headspace. Like, so when they see gassers, or when they see, heavy squats, it's like, look, we just need to inoculate the stimulus, which is like, think of how like inoculation works in a vaccine, right? Other than, never mind, I was going to make like a tinfoil hat joke. We're just not going to go there. There's too much of it out there. But like, if someone's going to see squatting in their camp, it's like, all right, we're not going to necessarily get you stronger in the squat. We didn't wreck your hips all off season trying to prepare for this and adapt to strength, because when you're standing on one leg during the majority of the game, it doesn't really matter. We're going to inoculate the stimulus, get you comfortable with squat technique, not trash your hips. We're going to spend 3 weeks, maybe high frequency, low volume, low intensity, or moderate intensity, getting you moving fast under the bar, inoculate you to the stimulus. And again, it's not about being strong, because no one's going to pull someone off the field because their squat wasn't big enough. It's like, all right, let's just inoculate that stimulus. Like the same thing with you and the step up, asymmetric or contralaterally loaded step up. It's like, it's just inoculating that position. So when he gets on the mound, that's like the autonomous turned or the associative turned autonomous, where it's like, oh, I've been here before and I've been here under heavier loads, right? Rather than like, tying a baseball to a cable machine and just going, it's just like, all right, well, that's going to fuck. You know what that is? I think of the same way about like a slingshot for a bench press.
Yeah.
Like, nothing throws my technique off more than a slingshot. Like, I'm just like, all of a sudden I'm like Gene Ridgelack with 1,000 pounds and like this massive elbow tuck. And after someone wedge me under the bar, it's like, this is nowhere near what I'm actually going to do. The same way, like, a cable attached to a ball will have a vector of resistance nowhere near what that person has to overcome. And inoculating the position or the shapes of just like, look, just be here with this hip up and this shoulder up and just chill. So it's like your body learns that. And when you learn it, then it's just like, hey, unzip that compressed file that we've learned of that position. So it's like, I think that's something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, because everyone's like, stress response adaptation curve, SRAs, yay, cortisol adaptation. And someone else is just like, I think inoculation kind of needs to enter into the conversation at some point. I got like the Mount Rushmore of just like disappointed faces.
No. But like, I think the guy that I see do the least amount of like boring, like you're saying, like adaptation versus inoculation is honestly James. Like, they're the videos that I'm most excited about, because they're always, it's like, goes back to the creativity. You know what I mean? And kind of like what we're saying, it's like James is the guy who I see on the most regular basis getting comfortable in space. And it's like, to me, like from an outsider looking in, like that's the thesis, or like that's the theme I get from James's work. It's like being comfortable in space. And then he kind of like solidifies his comfort in space via like the strength stuff that he does, like working through these big primal movements, super heavy. Like James is fucking strong. But it's like, and then all of a sudden comes in like the landmine baby cradle thing. And it's like, James is also comfortable in space, because like I went to do landmine baby cradle thing. I was not comfortable in space. So it's like, that's where I see kind of like what we're talking about is the inoculation versus adaptation. Like he's not in there just to drive like 2.5% every week. It's like, I see more the strength side of what James does as this, you know, like inoculation to those spaces or shapes that he gets into otherwise. And like, that's why he can do what he does. Like he has huge calves and huge biceps. And then all of a sudden he's just like floating around the gym.
Yeah. And, you know, with kind of going off of that, I think that's a big thing, is just getting exposure to different planes of motion, to just moving differently, like getting greater awareness of your body and how it moves in space and how it moves with different distributed, different, you know, just different weights, how we're applying that to movement, not just in a stationary position, but any way that we can move. If we can add some type of stimulus to that, some type of stress, it doesn't have to get to the point where, you know, we have hundreds of pounds on us in this position. That's not the goal. It's just getting into this position, being controlled in that if we can add a little bit of load to that, that helps us progress that stress. But getting our body, putting it in those positions so it has the opportunity to work through that, to understand how we move in it, and to just adapt to it, to get comfortable in it. Because yeah, a lot of those that, you know, some, by no means is it me just have this magic creative book that I'm just looking through and I'm finding all these, kind of same as you guys. Like I'll see stuff on the internet and I'm like, okay, I'm going to try that. Or, hey, what if I take this thing and I'm just going to add this lever to it, or extend this, or something like that, and just getting comfortable with it and seeing if it's valuable or if it's not. I've done plenty of things that like, no, that sucks. I'm not doing that again. But it's only because of that exposure and taking the time to work through it and think about it and get into those positions that I can evaluate if it's worth using or if it's something to throw out. So I know
that's the thing. Well, it's just like, you know, what do we keep hearing? Oh, exposure, awareness, understanding, right? These are all tenets of like learning. And I think what people don't get in their training is they don't get like, they don't understand how to like learn trends of like what, like, because you said right there, just kind of in passing, like what I'm going to throw out, right? Because people look at throwing out exercises as something that's like not having an open mind, right? And this is something that I think cripples a lot of people, is like, yeah, I'm all for white belt mentality. Like I'm all for, you know, being a forever student, but like, you know, I almost got expelled from grade school because like my 7th grade teacher, Mr. Cameron, was laying down some bullshit, and I wasn't going to sit there with an open mind and let old man River kind of tell me this is the way of the world. It's like, no, homie, like Pluto's not a planet anymore. Like get out of my grill with this stuff. Where people, I think what cripples a lot of like highly intelligent people is they're very open and very agreeable from like a big 5 personality trait. And it's like, it's hard to find a balance. And it's like, you found a balance in such a way it's so fluid, and you don't sit there and be like, fuck this, fuck this, fuck this. But like, I think people should strive for that ability to be creative, but also be critical, right? Because like some people see stuff and they'll see anything, and next thing you know, we got a barrage of Bosu ball bench chain people. We're like, we'd look at that and be like, there is literally, other than that being something that you are going to win money for doing, or like there's like a weird obscure Guinness Book of World Record Bosu ball chain bench press thing that I'm not aware of, there's no place for this anywhere, right? I've touched all 4 corners of training, from athlete and like from coach, from clinician to educator. It's like I've been around, and I know like for a fact that this is a fucking parlor trick and a smoke bomb of complexity that we just don't need. And I think that's really like, from a takeaway perspective, what I think, because it's always the smartest people They're like, well, you don't know what you don't know, but it's like, you do know what you do know. And using that like as a cornerstone to dig your heels in. And it's like, again, you kind of glossed over it because you're a way nicer person and better person than being shirtless over here. But because my openness becomes less and less the more I test things and the more I read, like having the theory and application. But it's like, I really think the industry it hides behind, like, if you're not open-minded to things, it'll hold you back. And it's like, man, I think a lot of people waste so much time in their training with it because they don't have that critical shield of like, look, this is the velvet rope. If you want to make your way into my program and have that doorman let you in, like you need to check a few boxes for me first, right? And so you can look at things and appraise it. And it's like, it's something that's learned over time, but I think it's something that people are pushed away from, like to always keep an open mind where it's like, yeah, nah.
And I think part of it becomes too, it's like, I don't know what metaphor to give it, so I won't give it anything, but it's like this idea that people are afraid to be left out. It's not FOMO, but it's like, it's the fear of you didn't also know. So immediately you agree. It's like you see something that you've never seen before that maybe doesn't make sense to you, but you're afraid that person already knew about this. And you're like, yeah, for sure. Definitely correct. And like you jump all over it. And it's like, or you could just be like, maybe it's not good. I don't know. And like, I feel the biggest thing is people are afraid to say they don't know. People either have to know or they have to not know. And they have to like immediately have a stance on things. And I remember like when I was young, like something my dad always told me was like, just be honest if you don't know something. Someone asks you a question and you don't know, just say, I don't know, or not my scope of practice, or I'll have to figure it out. So it's like we see so much nowadays with like how temporal stories are on Instagram. If we're going to use Instagram as this main place, it's like someone throws something up on a story and then all of a sudden tomorrow, guaranteed 100 people I follow will be doing a similar thing on their story. And it's like they're just afraid that they didn't know what it was, rather than just being like, I have no idea. Like someone asked me about HRV and I was like, yeah, it's a metric. Like, I don't fucking know. Like Shallow wears a whoopee cushion bracelet and it's something, I don't know. Like I literally don't know. But what I do know is that I've never needed to know. Like I've never gotten to a place with myself or any level of athlete I've trained, from power lifter to lawyer to MLB player, where I really needed to hone in on HRV before I needed to hone in on like stop playing Fortnite or some bullshit. So it's like people are so afraid to say they don't know. It's like, I'm not, because I literally know nothing.
Well, I mean, to dig deeper in that, I think there's such an identity underpinning to that, right? Like, because it's scarcity of resource is like, have you ever heard the theory of why we yawn?
No.
Have you ever heard that, James? The evolutionary theory of why we yawn?
I heard it makes
but like what? Hey?
I heard it makes your butthole looser, but maybe I'm wrong.
You know what? I trust your sources on that more than anyone. in living with you before, I 100% trust whatever girl told you that information. Anyways, well, it's like, you ever notice that yawning is contagious? Like that old thing that yawning is contagious? Well, it's the thought process and I could be totally butchering this, but I think it's kind of an interesting idea where it's like, if you're yawning, you're consuming more oxygen. You see that, identify that in like another person. You go, okay, like, is oxygen a scarce resource? Do I need to get oxygen as well? Because if he has more air than me, like I'm gonna die and he's gonna live. And I feel like scarcity of resource and resource allocation based off of identity is like, look, if this group has some, I'm here, I'm in this group. Like, I don't need to know anything because I have an outer valence of understanding protected to me by this group. I don't need to know anything about the carnivore diet because I have, through this idea and this network of everyone else that does it, we all might not in one individual person know the whole story, but we can create an outer valence that looks like we know what we're talking about, right? In the same way, like an idea in your head doesn't exist in a single neuron or synapse. It's, a confluence of a ton of different neurons and synapses. So a group identity is a confluence of an outer valence of like all these, synapsing individuals with their own little thought process and ideas, where it's like, if you pin down one person on the carnivore diet and be like, so tell me, start to finish, what's with the red meat? Like not a vegetable, like a Brussels sprout. They probably wouldn't have that answer, but they as a group can have this full, this front of an idea where it's like you see training and it's like, whether it's, you're bidding for clients or you're trying to create like a social identity through Instagram. It's like, you can float the heel just because, K-Ham and Schlesinger are floating the heel when they do stuff. And immediately you're protected by an identity. Like I see this, Pat Davidson.
Yeah.
So like Pat Davidson is amazing because he's an old, and I don't want to call him old man, but like he uses the internet like an old man because he uses his Instagram account like a Twitter account. It's like he just posts words on a platform for photos, and it's like, Dad, stop talking into the FaceTime. Like I'm just looking at a video of your ear hole, right? But it's like he has minions, and Pat's an OG, like he's been around, ex-phys, PhD. Springfield College, like I would argue one of the best schools in America for that, or even in the world for sports science. But he has like a follower of minions that fucking serious minions, like the smallest legs ever. And nothing against Pat, obviously, like Pat's a homie, but like what people are doing is they're embedding themselves behind this outer valence of identity, and they can just reshare a Pat thing, and then like they'll start posting their little words as pictures. And it's like, dude, like it's, so for me, like, and with Killian mentioned, like, look, saying you don't know, you just set the outer borders of your identity and be like, look, this is what I do know, right? I do know this stuff really well. And it's like, I don't really have to know this. That's not my wheel. Go to someone else. But I think a lot of people, and we see this, like, again, me and Killian share a lot of photos on a daily basis in the DM. And it's just like, it just comes down to a fundamental lack of identity and how how scarcity of resource drives people to identifications, whether it's BOSU ball training, whether it's, bands, whether it's HyperSpecificity, whether it's Westside, whether it's whatever. And it's like, then I see James is like, he's out there walking on water, right? Like he's out there just like, look, I'm immune to this. Like y'all are out there, and you just like, I think creating coming back to creativity, like using creativity to create like a movement signature for your training program that's founded in like, a critical appraisal of things that work and things that don't work. I think it's really hard for people to do. And I think it's something that like you've done really well. It's like you've kept an open mind enough to be like, okay, this makes sense, but I'm going to modify, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, because this is kind of like the outer border of like what I think to be true.
Like, I think just to kind of like jump off of what you're saying, and I think it's something that needs to be said, especially like when you bring up Pat Davidson, like, dude, super smart guy. I like 75% of the time agree with what he's saying. I think because of the idea that we all have that, like, I understand the nuance from which he's speaking from. Like, I get like, he's giving you the abstract in those fucking posts. You got to read the rest of it. You got to understand. But it's like, I think a big thing right now is people who validate, and this is like, again, like I'm giving credit to James here. Like we say how James is different. It's like people validate their intelligence by criticizing something. It's like validation through criticism versus like incentivizing a better option. And like you and I have educated a lot. And I always say this, I'm like, don't criticize the other thing. Incentivize the good thing. It's like if hip airplane is better than BOSU ball lunge, just talk about how good hip airplane is. Like, we don't need to talk about the other thing, because if you truly know and if you truly believe in what you believe, I don't ever have to criticize something. I can just incentivize the better option. Like we see this in politics. We see this in advertising. We see this in fitness way more than we ever should now, is somebody just jumping onto the internet to roast someone, but then they never have a better solution for you. It's just like, that's dumb because of this. So it goes back to like what you said, is this hive mind of like, if you're to corner this person and be like, well, then give me the answer. It's like, then they don't really have an answer. And we see this, I think, more now than ever in people really doubling down on the idea that they think people don't have an answer. Like, dude, I got a DM about my client I posted yesterday. Like, she's a female powerlifter. She's tripling 3 plates paused at the knee on deadlift for like sets, like 3 sets of 5 beltless. And it's like, it's great. It's sick. And some guy rolls in the DMs with, she needs more shoulder stability. I can't tell you what's wrong, but I know something's wrong. So I'm like, dude, what is it? Like, what do you see? And he's like, I don't know, but it's something about the shoulder complex. I'm like, well, what is it exactly? And he's like, you know what? I know what it is now. It's the humerus. It's just not staying stapled in the right position. And I'm like, what position is that? And then I go to his page and I find a video of him deadlifting, and his deadlift looks the same as my client with the same weight. So I just sent it to him and I just said, watch your video. But it's like, this guy doubled down and like, dude, I love this dude. He knows who he is if he listens to this. I have a ton of respect for you. I like you. But it's like, when you double down on the idea that you can criticize something and hope the other person calls out their own mistake, it just shines a light on like what you maybe don't know. And it's like, I think we've put way too much vested interest in this now on the internet, that it's like, I can just say this is dumb and someone's going to immediately be the victim and be like, no, I was wrong. Like, I'll cancel myself. And it's like, that's what James doesn't do. So respect to James.
You guys are giving me way too many compliments on this.
No, dude, it's just like, but that's the thing. It's like, we were out there. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, kind of to go off of what both of you are, it's, you know, how that applies so much to different aspects of life. I mean, we're all talking about fitness, but how that unquestioning compliance just applies to so many different mediums that we can look at going on in society today. And, you know, maybe it's because of that, like my enjoyment of philosophy or like political science background, but it's always question first. Like to me, that's a great approach of, okay, so I see this exercise, question, not just, okay, this is a great exercise because somebody way smarter than me is saying it's a great exercise. Okay, let me question it first. And thinking about, if like, so in that situation, if somebody gives, you know, this is the best exercise, a question I might go to is, when is that not true? Like, even if this is a great exercise, when is it not true? And go from there. Who does this not apply from? Because if you understand things are more complex than black and white, if you can make things more complex, you understand kind of the greater scope of what all can be applied to that, and then you can reduce it back to make it more simplistic. But it's only once you understand that greater scope that you can simplify, because you have that better understanding of it.
Yeah, Killian uses an example of like writing with the eraser.
Yeah. So it's like, like instead of everybody writing with a pencil, it's like start with the full picture and erase until you get what you want. But it's funny, like in what James was thinking, like I always go back to the Food Network. I must have one channel on my TV. But it's like Gordon Ramsay is like the all-time OG for me on the Food Network. Like I love this dude. I love the rants. I love like how he just roasts the shit out of people. I love his cooking. But it's like, man, Gordon Ramsay like rolls up to some shit pub and he's like, your burger sucks. Watch me make a burger. And like he just makes a burger out of ground beef and like sits it on a shitty bun with a piece of lettuce. And it's like, this is the best burger people have ever eaten. Because like James says, it's like, dude, Gordon Ramsay cooked in France for like 9 years. He can make a burger because he cooked in France. It's like he can't make a burger because he's only ever made burgers. Like he gets the complexity of everything so he can make a hamburger really well. And it's go ahead.
Oh no, it's just like this idea that like, I mean, and that's what makes training artful, right? Like, because we don't look at it in that way, that it's a craft. Like, one of my favorite quotes is like Michelangelo, like that created like the sculpture David and a bunch of other shit. Like there's a quote that beauty is the purgation of superfluidities, which is basically like he starts with a giant stone, and similar to the eraser on the page that's already filled in, it's Michelangelo. Think of what that statue was at the beginning, right? So this quote of beauty is a purgation of superfluidities. It's basically like it's there. You just need to find it. Right, like all the exercises are there. We've done everything. There's nothing new under the sun. Right, like I had some guy message me the other day, like on behalf of some guy coming in. It's evolutionary and revolutionary, his training methods, and it's like, see ya. Like no, because like, everything's been done. Right, it's like so all of our tools are in front of us. Like the stone is there. And what did Michelangelo do? Well, he just came in and whittled down to David. Right. And it's like there's an artfulness to that, and like there's an artfulness to training, because at the end of the day, like especially watching James train, it's like it's just reps and sets and exercises, and there's like variance in the way like he's processed and erased and refined. But like those in the know, like, you know, I'm not big on art, but I can look at that like, yeah, it's a cool statue of a guy. But a sculptor might look at that, how in the fuck did this guy do that? Right? Or like you listen to a musician. Like there's that Simpsons quote about jazz music where Lisa goes to the club with Homer, and he's like, I don't get it. It's like, listen to the notes he's not playing. He's like, I could do that from home. And he's just like, it's kind of the same idea where it's just like, it's between the lines, right? Like it's between the lines on the filled in page. It's between the lines in the granite block that the sculpture comes from. It's between the lines of the reps and sets that I think really make this an art. And it's just, some people are out there, because you can have a final product. You can run Michelangelo's David through like a 3D printer right now and literally come up with a replica. But you know, someone in the Louvre in France, or in you know, the Louvre in Abu Dhabi or wherever the other one is, will look at that and be like, that's a replica, that's a fake, right? Here's why, right? You go into the nuance and the detail of it. And it's like, you talk about, because he's cooked in France for however many years, now a burger is like, right? It's like, it's the same thing with like, yeah, I talked about that Chartres Cathedral. It's like, it's a giant fucking maze. It's really creepy. It kind of looks like, you ever seen the movie Prisoners?
Yeah.
Oh, have you seen this, James? Oh, dude, it's crazy. It's like, there's like this maze thing that keeps recurring, and it's like an endless maze.
Like
and with like, what's that?
The artist, MC Escher. It's like the
yeah. So it's the Escher
okay.
hands. Think of the Escher hands
labyrinth.
drawing hands. Yeah. So like the Escher photo of hands drawing hands. It's like, where does one begin and one end? And it's like, it's because you've kind of walked all four corners of the maze that you can say that this doesn't have an end to it, right? I talked about Chartres Cathedral when we talked about shapes and architecture. It's the same thing. You have to go to all corners. The idea is like, you got to venture to all corners of the earth, and then you find the middle, and then it's like this cross thing. And that's really what the cross is. If you look at like Christianity and other pagan religions that use the cross as an emblem, it's like, look, you got to go everywhere to end up in the center point. You can't just show up at the center point. And I think a lot of people, what they're trying to do is they're just trying to arrive at the center point, right? And they're just like, here's this. It's like, based off of what? And then where do you go from there, right? Like, if you, like what James said, where is this not applicable, right? Where is this not applicable, and reverse engineer from there? Start with the empty slate, or start with the built-in page and erase down to where you need to go. Start with the full block of granite and whittle down to what you need, rather than trying to build up. And you can always see, as someone who's like, you know, the three of us can look at something and be like, that's a fake. That's a fake for sure. I see that. I can see it in the way you know what I found the other day? I've never seen it before. I came across fake hammer strength equipment. I was in a gym somewhere, and I was lifting, and I'm like, this just feels wrong. Like this, I felt like a snob drinking wine. Like this is off. This is off. It was like, it all tastes like sour grapes to me. But I think that's something that's missing, is like the craftsmanship. But one thing I think, if you look at, like, talk about Michelangelo and talk about like Da Vinci and all that, what made those guys good was that, like, the definition of Renaissance is that they do more than one thing, right? Like, from political science to history to carpentry, like, I think it's the perspective. It's the fact that we've gone around and touched these different corners, and when we get to the center point, we're like, all right, here's the guy.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, James. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, having that greater understanding, I think it really opens you up to being criticized. You're okay with being wrong, because you understand that whenever you're presenting something, I'm presenting it in this moment as this, but I know that there are caveats to this, that, you know, it might not be true. There's, what is it? It's one of my favorite quotes from Edgar Allan Poe. It's, words have no power to impress the mind without the exquisite horror of their reality. And I think a lot of people, like, that fear holds true to them, that I'm acting under this guide until I get called out. That's the real fear, is within them, they know their limitations, and getting called out on that. That's why there's such a greater reaction, because it's the reality that I'm so limited in this that I can't answer those questions when we go one or two layers deep of why we're doing this or why I'm implementing it. It's you know, it's not I saw this and that person knows more than me, so I'm putting it in, but it's that greater understanding, and words not having that exquisite horror, because it's not the reality unless your reality is so limited that you're not able to access those greater layers and have the greater explanations to back up why you're doing something.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the times is how people are digesting information, because like how many layers deep can you really go on an Instagram post, right? And this is the backing, and for a lot of people, it's like, it's sound bites, it's clips, it's 140 characters or less, right? Like that's what, I mean, I love the podcast for a lot of reasons, but like it's kind of a proving ground, because like one of the big things we're huge on is language. Like your language matters, like, especially when dealing, like we can talk about athletes and all that, and it's super fun to nerd out, but like the majority of people in the fitness industry make their money, for better, for worse, off of the general population, right? And so it's like the inception moment, like the Leo DiCaprio slipping into the mind and putting an idea in someone's head, it comes from the language that you use. Like literally the first week of the level 1 course is like, your language matters. Like the words you use matter. If I say weak, you say strong, right? Like it's almost like this ink plot thing of like seeing what's on the other side. Like if I, if it looks like, if I put up an ink blot or like a test and he's like, oh, it looks like a black butterfly. It's like, yeah, because that's exactly what it kind of looks like. But if it looks like, your cousin beating the shit out of you in a closet, it's like, whoa, okay. So we're kind of seeing like where the associations are. And I think people need to take it on themselves to be a few levels deep, like you said, and understand that, look, your words should have exquisite horror. And that's like, I feel like that there's an Edgar Allan Poe somewhere, like there's an Edgar Allan Poe book somewhere in the floorboards, like Beating Heart is somewhere in the floorboards of that fucking gym you train in. that's like, there's like a crow just sitting somewhere, or like a raven rather, like a raven sitting on the top of that gym, just like waiting for you. I'm marking the time right now so Kyle can edit out the silence, because I know what we're both doing. We're both waiting to be like, say something, and then someone else will say it. And I'm like, no, you go ahead.
I think like the reference I was going to make when I rudely interrupted James was like, we were talking about like experience, and you had said like having to have been to all these like 4 corners of something before you can see the middle. It's like, man, like I've been watching a lot of Frasier, this TV show. I think it's great. Love it. There's an episode the other day where like Frasier, Niles, and their dad, Marty, are all in a car, and the taxi cab driver is pregnant and she goes into labor. And like Frasier and Niles both have medical degrees. So like Niles gets in the front seat and he fucks it up. Frasier gets in the front seat, he fucks it up. And then their dad gets in the front seat and she's like, well, what's your education? And he's like, nothing, but I was a cop for 30 years. And then she's like, oh, thank God, someone who knows what they're doing. And he delivers the baby, no problem. And it's like, it goes back to that idea that it's like, it's experiential. It's having been there, regardless of its political science or a history degree or being a carpenter. It's like having been somewhere where you did something, anything at all, is so much more valuable at the end of the day than maybe for 10 minutes having done something very specific, right? It's like, rather than doing the baseball tied to the cable machine with your friend holding your ankle, it's like maybe having just been under stress makes you better on the mound. It's like maybe having just been a cop for 30 years, you don't need a medical degree to deliver a kid, because you've just been there. You've been under stress. You've been under load. You've been inoculated. So it's like having completed 2 degrees in anything, having traveled the world and lived out of Airbnbs, and like having to teach people equal to the same intelligence as you, being in a room every day with 30 people who are also smart. It's like me having traveled with people who are way smarter than me. It's like having been somewhere, having done something, sometimes at the end of the day is better than any specificity you could ask for.
Yeah, and yet the market still pushes to super specificity to identify as an intellect or academic, right? Like how many people are like, putting up their front of like, PhD or masters and all that. Like it's literally not worth the paper it's printed on, as someone who can tell you firsthand that, look, I paid a lot of money and spent a lot of time on something that I do not use on a daily basis when it comes to my work environment, right? And yeah, James the same. It's like, here I am at Washburn holding it down the fort, talking to 2 jackasses that aren't wearing enough clothes. But it's like, I didn't go to school for this. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. But it's like, again, it comes down to like experience. It comes down to reps, and it's almost like in a lot of ways when we start to think about it, there's like, I feel like there's an entitlement with academics and academia of like a revenge of the nerds. It's like, look, shreds had their time in the sun, you know, photoshopping pictures and, you know, running crank and getting jacked. It's like, what do those guys know? It's like, what do you know? Right? You're massaging research and writing, you know, misleading abstracts and infographics, and you're editing things that way, and you're self-selecting with confirmation biases. Like at the end of the day, like you're still just a person that's equally as flawed as, you know, the guy with a bunch of tattoos and the protein and the promo code. And like for me, it just comes back down to like identity. Like, can you identify with, you know, your experience in touching these four corners, whether those four corners are, you know, academia to application, whether it's, you know, laterally thinking from philosophy and political science, or, you know, carpentry and training. Like what gives you dimension to your identity that doesn't force you into a single camp of like, here's our leader, here's our post, this is what we do, this is what I think. Don't ask me anymore because I don't have that. Like, but I can refer to a friend. It's like, this isn't like, you know, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It's like, you gotta kind of have to embody the full identity of your training, whether it's your own personal training or whether it's like, you know, the training or coaching that you provide for your clients. I think a lot of people struggle with that, like just having an identity, period. Like, not to be too metaphysical.
No, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head of like, it's so often that, at least in my opinion, that a lot of people just don't know who the fuck they are. That's why they're not comfortable with themselves. That's why they're so reliant on external things and can't kind of set internally, because they're not comfortable and they're not willing to go down that rabbit hole to better understand themselves. You know, there is that air of that I did something, so that validates me, and I deserve this, or I've earned it. And at some point, whenever people get to that, they're not willing to just go in a room, sit down, shut up, and listen to somebody. But yeah, I think a lot of that is there can go back to people just not being comfortable with themselves and not willing to take a deeper dive into their own headspace and ask some of those difficult questions. But
then you have people who are too comfortable with themselves and look like my friend Tyler Durden over here, who hasn't been wearing a shirt for the last 3 months.
Yeah. It's I think like what James said is so important. Like, people just aren't comfortable with themselves, and we see those people reach externally, or like eccentrically to like to other things. But it's like, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day where they were like asking me like what I wanted to do with my life or like the business that I have. And I was like, hey man, like straight up, I want to work the least amount of hours and get paid enough. And they were like, oh yeah, well, like I want to do this, and like, you don't want a house. I'm like, I don't really care, man. Like, I don't care how big my house is or where I live. And then they were like, but why not? Like, if you did this, you could make exponentially more. And I was like, listen, the water that comes out of my tap in my rented condo and the water that comes out of your 4,000 square foot house is just as cold. But it's like, when I drink my water, I enjoy my life. And it's like, I think people are so caught up in like this external curation of experience, right? Like, how can I curate an experience that others want to give this perception of who I am? Where it's like, dude, I'll drink cold water out of the palm of my hand. I know who I am. Like, I got no shirt on. I work out in a dungeon, apparently. My ass cheeks to the camera. It's like, that's good for me. So I think like, and if you want like a huge house and you want to be G'd up and you want to be a gangster, like that's cool too. But just know that that's what you want, right? Like, don't attach that to happiness as in like an aside, or like don't attach that, like James said, like to your identity, or like you said, to your identity. It's like, your degree is not your identity. Your degree may create parts of your identity. And it's like, me being a carpenter creates parts of my identity. But it's like, at the end of the day, like 1 million years ago, people's last names dictated what they are. We don't do that anymore for a reason. Like, we've ascended Maslow's hierarchy of needs. My last name doesn't need to be like guy who touches wood a lot. So it's like, I don't need to associate my identity with what I do. Like, I can be anything. And I think people like often just get stuck, right? They're like, I'm the stability guy, I'm the strength guy, I'm the functional movement pattern dancing guy. And it's like, you're not any of those things. You're just you. And like tomorrow you can do different things. So I think like that's a big thing, is like James said, it's just like know who you are and like be comfortable that the water that comes out of your tap is just as cold as the water that comes out of the tap at your Airbnb.
So, okay, this is not to take it too far off, but I'll bring it back.
Do it. No, please do it.
Please take it whatever I just said.
Yeah, just keep touching your wood. Do your thing. Okay, so do either of you are either of you familiar with the 5 love languages?
Yeah.
Yeah. My girlfriend drills at home all the time because I don't listen.
But that's part of it. Like I'll use that not just for myself for better understanding, or like an Ingram personality test. You need some type of understanding of yourself, but also how you interact with people. And in like the 5 love language or the Ingram, those are ones I like first off because they're free and easy if I'm sending it out to somebody. But understand yourself and then understand the people that you engage with and interact with. So in my love languages, the bottom 2 are gifts and words of affirmation. So like compliments are shit to me. Like I don't take them well. I don't really need them. I think part of that applies from sports because my understanding was always I can't fix what I'm doing well. I need to know what I'm not doing well so I can apply that, so I can focus on that. But I know that in myself, so I have a better understanding whenever I'm in a relationship, or, you know, whether that's a significant other, whether that's family, friends, if I have an understanding of what their love language is, or if they have a higher, or if, you know, one of their first ones is words of affirmation, I need to be more mindful of that because I know myself enough that that's not going to be something natural. But if this is somebody I care about, I need to try to focus on that, try to improve on it. But I can only do that because I know myself first and be able to apply that to the other person to try to get better, to curate a better relationship with that because I understand them as well. But I can, again, only focus on that once I understand myself and have that point to bridge from.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I look at like the big 5 personality traits in a very similar way, because how much of what we do, especially now, like given the current landscape moving so much online, it's like how much what we do is communication. But I know great coaches that are handcuffed by not being able to use like tactile stimulus and not be able to be there in person. Now they have to exist in an online space, and it's like, you know, sink or swim, right? Like you don't have that best tool, and you likely self-selected a successful group of clients that are responsive. And it's like they've just fit your model rather than you being adaptive to fit theirs. It's like some people are visual, some people are tactile, but understanding like methods of communication from like a theoretical perspective, when then moving it to applied, like looking at, is this person open, conscientious, extroverted, agreeable, or neurotic? Like then in a similar sense that you can look at like the 5 love languages, you can look at a Myers-Briggs, you know, ENTJs or whatever the hell they are. But it's like, I think at the root of it is communication, but like just as communicating with others is likely going to be predicated on how well you communicate with yourself. Like you start to understand that words matter, not only like when we interact this way, but like, or interact with the client, but when you talk to yourselves, right? Like, you know, you talk to some people and like, you know, you just hear them reference the way they not treat themselves. Like plenty of people are just glad handing themselves, and probably too often, but like when it comes to like actually in the way they think inside their own head, it's like you might want to change that, man, because there's enough people out there trying to beat you up yourself. So I think only once you fix that, which is like, hey, that's kind of like, you know, go touch all 4 corners, then you know where the center is. And I think too many people are just trying to stand in the center and just go like, this is the way it is out there. It's like, no, it's not. You've never been there. Like, you have no idea.
100%.
I feel like there's another podcast just on that, because like there should be like,
easily.
I don't know, at the end well, because that's the thing, like I don't want to like discredit what we do, but like at the end of the day, it's reps and sets, right? It's something we've said 1,000 times, right? Like it's just, what's the point of doing it, right? Like I think if you use it as a vehicle of communication and like being able to build relationships that way, like that's all I use barbells for. I have
was talking to Killian the other day. I did an F45 workout. Like, what? Are you serious? Like, yeah, I almost had a fucking aneurysm. But like, that was that's how I know how to communicate. It's like, all right, this dude owns F45. Like, this guy started the largest fucking fastest growing fitness franchise of all time, like faster than CrossFit. And I'm like, hey, you want to do an F45 workout? In my head is like, no. But it's like, and my lungs were also saying no. And my left ventricle was also saying no. But it was just like, yeah, like this is how we communicate. Like we use reps and sets as a means of communication. And if you're bad at it, then, there's no point in doing it, right? And just, sit in the dark corner of your basement, not you, Killian, but like on your Reddit thread with no shirt on and like just throw shit into the internet and not offer solutions.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to offer that guy, but no, I don't want to. All right, fuck you, see you later. Like opportunity lost. Right? Like, all right, or I could go and like, that's kind of a ceremonious sort of breaking of bread, bending of bars, kettlebells, not bars. But yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation and one that like the fitness industry doesn't lend itself too often to have, but I think it's probably the most important conversation that people should be having.
Agreed.
All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to schedule another one and just talk about that stuff. Because I feel like the whole podcast is like, I wonder if we can dance around the obvious point that we all just want to talk about, like more metaphysical things than actually training. Like, specificity. Let's test the waters and see if we can actually talk about what matters. But I guess like to close this off, like, I mean, it was a little bit about creativity and inadvertently, I think we may have actually landed on a point for the first time in the 175 episodes of this podcast. Because I think it just goes to show you, like, as you say, like, not to go too deep. It's like, that's really where a lot of the like root of your decision-making process, like we talk about how you train and how you filter information, but like how you think is going to be the fundamental core of how you make decisions around training. But it's like, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So I think like that's kind of shows the creativity, or it's like, you've gone out and you listen to everything under the sun. You try things that you think are applicable, but to hear a coach talk about the love languages, like, again, I only get that when I'm getting grilled for not paying attention, but it's such a lateral way of thinking about what we do. Right. And I think having an experience in, other fields makes you a better, well-rounded person. Sure. But like coach is what most people are after. And if it takes the outcome of just being a better coach to get people to start talking about these things, then fuck it. I don't care. Cause you talk to some people and it's just like there's just nothing there. You're just knocking it like, hello. And it's just like, Doug, step up to lateral lunge, depth jump box, plyometric ankle stiffness. You're like, what? Like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Like, but there's nothing there. Like they are just identified as that outer valence. I think it's interesting to see someone like who's like just been so deeply entrenched into it, like be also able to put it in perspective. Like you dropped an Edgar Allan Poe quote on it. Like what?
But yeah, I mean, part of that is it's the Trojan horse into it is reps and sets, but it's really about the process behind it. That we can use this to kind of show the progression of it or like highlight the points through the reps and sets, but it's the process into that and making those connections with people that allows that process to even happen.
Yeah, I think like James is like entirely correct. And I think just like what you said, Shallow, it's like the whole thing is like, number one, like language matters. And number two, like, I don't think we get to talk about anything we talk about unless all three of us were good in some way at communicating with someone. Like I'm not the best communicator at all. I have no idea how to talk to other human beings. I just talk the same way all the time. James is over here like Don Julio, Don Juan, like love language and people to death. But it's like, I think we're all good at communicating. Therefore, we're all good at using reps and sets. I think some people suck so bad at communicating, they don't even get a chair at the table, right? So I think if we were to all do this again and we were to just talk about, like James said, actually going deeper, like maybe you need to go to France for like 10 years, man, and then come back and cook the hamburger. And I think that's what a lot of people need to do.
Well, yeah, let's do it. I mean, let's put another one in the books and let's just go all in. Let's put the sport specificity aside, because I think people, you listen to more podcasts than probably anyone on the planet. Like, I feel like you could press them at like two times speed for the amount of content you get in, but like actionable takeaways, because, you know, people might listen to this and be like, oh wow, like pitching, that's a cool like runway of progression to like inoculate position. I've never thought of inoculation over adaptation, but like that's not really helpful. Like, that's helpful to like maybe 3 people who like work with a pitcher and also listen to a podcast. It's a very small overlap of Venn diagram of an individual that might mean something. Not that there's nothing to take away, but like if we did another one about like, okay, where was it that you two guys first started to notice that like communication matters? Like, where were you? What was the situation where you're like, I didn't get out of this what I thought I was going to? And what like were kind of the action steps? What books? I think people really like moving more towards like, okay, that's great. I've identified there's an issue. Thank you. What do I do about it? So maybe let's schedule another one, James, if you're down, to like go a little bit deeper. Because you're the first, and I'm going to say this because she has no canceling headphones on. You're the first male heterosexual to talk about the love languages to me, and I'd not be in trouble for it. So like, but it's an interesting concept because it's like there's, you know, we can say the same thing from 3 different ways, and we're looking at the same center point from 3 different sort of parts of that cross, and it all centers around like the same thing, where it's like, look, you got to kind of know a thing or two about yourself first, and before you can go out and actually start to attempt to know how to communicate with other people. But it'd be super interesting to like dive more into like that love languages thing. You know, whether we go into like ENTJ, Myers-Briggs, whether we go into Big 5 personality traits or something like that. But that would be something super interesting, because I think you have a really interesting position. Because you work at a university. Yeah. Me and shirtless over here can sit around finding old Labatt's blue or neon hats or wherever the fuck he gets his wardrobe from. And if people don't like what we say, it's kind of like, unfollow, unsubscribe. I don't know. I don't really care. But like, dude, when I worked at the university, and like I said, my close friend Zach Trahan was in your position, and like the amount of political correctness, and like if there's anyone who's aware that words matter, it's someone that works in an academic institution in 2020. That is a very sensitive conversation to navigate. And like at the end of the day, it's like you just need to get stuff done. You need to know how to communicate on, you know, to far left student to far right, maybe academic professor tenure or something like that. So being able to be fluid in that and picking up on that, I think is a skill that's less and less taught, because the situations to be in are less and less. Like, you know, me and Durden over here just sit in our basement and talk shit, where it's like, he's in an office. Have you noticed that he's in an office? I'm in someone else's house. Right. And you're sitting there like, I don't know, maybe it's laundry day, but I feel like it's been laundry day for 3 months. Every time I talk to you, you're not wearing a shirt. So I think like I think that's probably like a super valuable, or that is a super valuable like context to give people and like how to communicate, because it's such a like a fluid skill set that needs to be like Killian's like, look, I talk one way to everyone. It's like yes and no, right? Like you see you interact in a room full of 30 people. It's like, you know, you talk to the meathead guy slightly different than you talk to the 50-year-old, but there's an essence there that's still uniquely Killian, right? Like it's still uniquely the same kind of irreverent, same sort of like off the cuff, speaking in prose and analogy and metaphor and things like that. But it takes it to a whole new level when you work in an environment that you work in.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, gentlemen. We'll put a wrap on this. We'll put another one in the books, and we'll deep dive. I'm probably going to bring some tissues because I'm probably going to cry. Let's go deep. Let's go dark. Or what is Killian? What is your saying?
Never back down, never pull out.
All right, that's how
balls deep every time.
Well, wow, cut from the same cloth, you two. All right, James Thayer, Killian Hamilton. Thank you for your time. What we'll do the thing where you tell people where to find you. I'll put it all in the show notes. James, you go first.
Let's see. Instagram is at Thayer2513. Same email, Thayer2513 @gmail. Or yeah, we'll use my personal one, not the university one. Probably best.
Okay, Ham.
Yeah. So Instagram is Killian.Hamilton, or you can check out the website k2coaching.ca, or just shoot me mean emails at khamilton@k2coaching.ca. Someone will definitely shoot me a mean email.
Yeah, there's something wrong with your client's shoulder complex. It's really looking at your shoulder complex. And I'm going to use the word complex to make it seem like I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's complex.
Okay. It is complex. You wouldn't understand. All right, guys. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on, guys. And we'll do this again real soon.
Wicked.
Appreciate it.